Sonic Spring Broken. Sonic, Tails, and Creams' family head for the Spring Festival that apparently exists. The internet told me it's a reference to a poster in SE2 that implied it was a more interesting festival than we'll see here. Something you'd expect a bouncy castle in. But I never memorized all the posters in City Escape, so this reference means nothing to me. And all knowing it's a reference does is diminish its quality because it's less original. It's just original by being the first Sonic story to take place in a spring festival. Sonic smartly decides to wait for chili dogs until after the roller coaster as I see what sort of looks like a red Vector the crocodile and wonder what animal he's supposed to be. He shouldn't be a crocodile because the only crocodiles in the Sonic series have always been the normal color, so this would contradict the rule established in the series. As if it isn't bad enough that it'd look like a DeviantArt OC. Tails the genius risks choking. This should have been Sonic, because he's the irresponsible one. The whole time, the fact that he's not dark blue enough is bothering me. It makes him annoying for me to look at because dark blue is a lot cooler. This is a common problem with IDW, but it's especially obvious here when the lack of an actual plot so far makes me bored enough to pay attention to the art. Amy mentions a flower contest and wishes Silver good luck, as I'm glad the writer brought back his interest in plants. And I wonder why the hell Rough and Tumble were used in the story. It seems completely unlike them to enter a flower contest because they're nothing but thugs, so you'd expect them to be too embarrassed to associate themselves with flowers. It'd make more sense if they stole these flowers to get a huge cash prize from winning. The heroes are just amused at seeing criminals that used to work for Eggman instead of reacting relatably in the slightest. Sonic being annoyed at them would actually make him look cool compared to being an exaggerated idealist, which only Amy is supposed to be. It's a surprise that Amy's not in the competition. The story adds depth to Espio and Jewel because they're entering the contest too. It turns out the prize is a giant gemstone, which is slightly more interesting than money, which we saw perfectly fine in Security Hall. It's too bad most of the story so far is just characters vomiting out exposition boring me to death, along with how slow the pacing is, which proves that you need more than just an interesting premise to make a story interesting. That's only a third of it. I have to assume the only reason a 13-year-old is one of the judges in a flower contest is that she got special privileges for being a celebrity. An entire page is spent on her introducing every flower one at a time, and it turns out one of the flowers is on fire because of Tumble, apparently. Silver uses telekinesis on a fire extinguisher to make it put out the fire, which is more boring than I'd expect from the words psychic firefighting. So what if he used the telekinesis to do it very slightly faster when he didn't have to? I thought he'd remove the fire from the flower and get rid of it because he can throw energy balls in 06 and catch them in Archie, so he can control energy too. Tails says something just doesn't add up here, somehow talking as if he hasn't instantly assumed the arsonists were their former enemies. Because he's got no street smarts at all in this comic. Vector's character is also massacred because he didn't instantly assume it was Rough and Tumble either. Instead making the story extraordinarily lame by talking like there's any mystery to this, when there's only two evil people in the contest. Him chuckling doesn't necessarily prove he did it because of course he'd be glad that a competitor's flower was set on fire. But this still couldn't be any more obvious. The only way it could possibly not be Rough and Tumble is if the arsonist was someone who wasn't in the contest who never even showed up before. Yeah, because we all know that only the best mysteries are the ones where the culprit comes completely out of nowhere, so that's impossible to figure it out. Foreshadowings for suckers. I wish the padding was removed and just cut to when the plot started progressing. Right now, all I have to say about this is why is Vector questioning anyone but Rough and Tumble? Sure, red herrings are a thing in mysteries, but he doesn't know he's in a work of fiction. And he doesn't say that he watches a ton of mysteries on television, so he shouldn't just assume they're red herrings. Speaking of out-of-nowhere writing, Silver says he sabotaged his own flower even though he said earlier that he wanted to be recognized for his hard work. Meaning there was no reason whatsoever for him to say that. He says his flower died right after he came here, but that would mean he knew it was dead when he was saying he wanted to be recognized. Why does he think that if he entered a dead flower, it'd make the other flowers get hurt? This is goofy. Tails wonders why his flower died, and Vector wonders if the soil was herbicide. The culprit's on the run, and the silhouette instantly looks like Jewel, which would be out of character. It'd be more in character if it was Charmy, who's never foreshadowed to be in the festival anyways. I really hate that they don't just find the culprit right away after this. We should have seen this. Because now I'm even more impatient during blatant padding worthless panels. Big gives Vector a billion years of exposition, and it doesn't seem to amount to anything anyways. Sonic tells Tails not to worry and calls him Buddy, as Tails doesn't like that the festival grounds is in bad shape. Tails says they should divide and conquer and gets told excellent plan. Sonic cleans the mess and it's too vague about what Tails is doing, and Vector just says his gum's gonna keep the dunk tank sealed, but we don't get to see it. The culprit had better actually be a silhouette person, because I'm assuming he's just drawn that way to keep the obvious mystery up, and that's extraordinarily lame from being immersion ruining. This isn't just a kids comic, it had a zombie apocalypse in it, and kids don't deserve lame, insulting material anyways. Sonic sees someone run away, and his selfish kid interrupts him in something clearly important with his own meaningless problem, so Sonic says he'll get him a new balloon to make himself look good. He's thanked, and Tails finds out it was Charmy. Vector says this wasn't like him at all. It's not like him in IDW where it's more of a goody-goody. But it's like the Sonic X and Sonic Channel Charmy, who'd annoy or prank his friends respectively. He says he was trying to help Silver and didn't know he used Plant Killer. And he only ran away because everyone chased him. But why would they intentionally start chasing him unless he started to run away in the first place? Why would he run away? That doesn't add up. He wouldn't blame himself for the flower being set on fire. And would he stick around to comfort Silver and not know the flower died if he did run away before that? But it's so good that Charmy didn't do it on purpose, because even the worst Charmy would have nothing against Silver because he has no personal experience with him, and it'd be mean for Sonic to tell him his bad experiences with Silver. Vector thinks someone switched the labels on the bags because he noticed something strange with them, and Sonic finds out the labels are sticky, so somehow, instead of the two smart people assuming that glue is why it's sticky because clearly glue is needed to switch labels successfully, they both assume the culprit has sticky hands. It turns out Ruff is the culprit. Why did the writer even bother writing a mystery story then? There definitely should have been a new villain in the contest. Sure, in real life, the obvious culprit usually is guilty. But that doesn't make an engaging story unless you just assume the obvious culprit won't be the obvious one. Which is annoying anyways if there's only one person it looks like it should reasonably be, because then it looks like a bad story the whole time. They should have said it's probably Ruff, but they have to thoroughly investigate just in case. Somehow Vector wonders why the paper-thin villain did the deed, when it's instantly obvious why someone would. He's been a detective for years, hasn't he? This isn't a complicated situation. Vector's not an idiot. But most of the time he is here. What was the point of having it be a mystery if Ruff was the culprit? I was hoping Jewel was the culprit, because then I'd see that she is capable of moral failings in some situations, which would make her relatable and realistic. I know she's a good person, but that doesn't mean she's necessarily above being so desperate to win she sabotages someone. Even good people can make mistakes, and this would make her a deep character instead of literally just the boring girl who likes paperwork, who's only not a Mary Sue because she hesitated to tell people how to escape a fire one time. Jewel could still be a good person after being the culprit. She could say sorry and hug Silver and feel like an actual person finally. Instead of her only memorable failing being she prioritized her own insecurity over getting people away from a fire under time pressure. So clearly she wasn't pure good all the time to begin with, because she can still be selfish. Amy wants to force Ruff to make up for what he did, even though if it's forced, it won't reflect well on him anyways. So her dialogue is weird. She should have just said, how are we gonna punish him properly? I assume breaking a rule in this contest isn't punishable by law because it's just a little contest. So it only makes sense to come up with your own punishment if the contest doesn't have any special punishment for cheaters beyond disqualification as usual, which I assume is the case. Amy gets the idea to put him in a cage so Silver can dunk him, which is the cliche punishment at carnivals. Why does he bother saying he'll only let himself get dunked once when he has a telekinetic in front of him that could do it as much as he wants? And it's too cynical to think he'd be above doing it all day. The story insists on padding out the announcement of who won like it's Story of Seasons. Espio won, which is a nice surprise because it would have been stereotypical to have a girl win. Everyone in the contest besides Silver, it came out of nowhere that they like growing flowers. So Espio winning makes as much sense as anyone else. I've really got to compliment the little things with this one, because like most of the stories, there's nothing majorly good here. Story-wise, of course. Art's supposed to look good. Amy says 3 cheers for Espio and compliments his flower, and he humbly thanks her and plans to donate his gem to the museum. I guess he means the one that used to belong to Jewel. He should have said Jewel's so-called museum, because I don't understand why a museum would show off jewels. They're not man-made antiques or dinosaur bones. They're still very old things. But by that logic, every rock belongs in a museum. Jewel used the word museum very loosely with hers, because Jewel showing off building takes too long to say and sounds silly. The plot progression ends there with nothing but the predictable carnival stuff happening. There's nothing really spring about the Spring Festival. Flowers are grown in seasons aside from spring too, so a flower contest doesn't make it a spring festival. It'd be better if they went with a pun and used springs from the classic games. But what is unique about spring that could be celebrated? It's when you can plant stuff outside again and the leaves on trees come back. But of course greenery is a thing in summer and fall too. The only way they could do this concept better than a generic carnival would be to follow to the letter what the Spring Festival was clearly meant to be like in SA2. And that'd only be impressive if it led to a festival that's not just a typical carnival anyways. Issue 70. The story wastes my time telling me that the next round of the airboarding tournament is starting when the main characters aren't involved in it, apparently. The obvious gets stated, and Knight seems perfectly happy saying that the goal of a public race is to survive when he's not supposed to be evil, and this is being done to raise money for a good organization, so obviously this wouldn't be allowed. How is the audience of the tournament so sadistic that they're all smiling at this? The story continues admitting that it doesn't have enough actual plot to last an entire issue by showing me the race starting for an entire page, and actually showing me the race at all. Why would I ever be expected to care about what's happening in it when none of Team Sonic is in it anymore, apparently? Definitely not Tails and Amy. And all that's left are people I don't know, and people we're supposed to hate. So slapstick is the only thing I'm gonna want to see. Not any sort of other pointless details. At this point in the comic, it's better to point out when the dialogue isn't boring for once. It turns out that instead of Sonic simply flying to the place he wanted to check out, to protect his friends, Sonic is participating in the race for absolutely no reason whatsoever in a disguise that makes him look evil, because apparently it's that important to him to win the race for selfish reasons. And he has a black text bubble to imply that he's got a disguised voice too. But he still should know better than to say no one's fast enough to stop him from turning the whole place upside down. Again, he's talking like a villain and drawing attention to himself for no reason. Why is he scaring the audience watching the tournament on camera, when the comic actually expects us to think he's a good person? and acting evil the second you're in disguise is a what you are in the dark moment that doesn't reflect well on somebody. Now if this was a good Sonic comic, I would instantly assume that the disguise brainwashed him. But IDW Eggman's not allowed to be clever enough for that, because the writers think he never had a solid plan or backup plan, despite forces in SA1. So instead it's safer to assume that it's just a character being impossibly stupid again for no reason. If the writers still want him to participate, what was the point of writing him to be knocked out of the previous round? He's mostly been talking the same, treating Jet just like he would normally. Not enough is actually happening, which only contributes to the boredom. Sonic's new airboard gear makes someone fall from the wind it makes, and Tangle catches her with her tail, finally getting to do something useful for what felt like forever. She needs to do stuff like this way more often. Lanolin tells Mimic to call security to plot against Sonic, which makes his team look like massive idiots for not telling Lanolin's team the plan. For literally no reason. The only way this can make sense is that Sonic had no faith in their team in terms of both being likable people and competent people. So he thought it'd just be even more fun for him he'd easily overcome. Tails flies up to the airship carrying Amy, and they have to stay still, hiding from the security who look like idiots because one of them somehow assumes that the sound of Amy and Tails smacking into something is the same sound they've heard a whole bunch of times that shouldn't sound identical to it. And the other one somehow doesn't look around just in case. One of them assumes the place is impossible to get into because the door can lock, even though it's right above a tournament full of flying airboards, and there's just an announcement about a rogue racer. The heroes wait until the security idiots leave, but that still doesn't mean it makes sense for a supposed genius to not whisper what he's saying. Why didn't they say they should check the machine shop before they snuck into a place with people in it? And why was Amy dumb enough to scream when she was hiding from people seconds ago? This should result in the security running over to her, especially since this is a world full of anthropomorphic animals who should have better hearing than humans. And Rouge even said she had great hearing in one of the games thanks to her big ears, so the idea is canon. Instead of following canon, I bet they'll never hear her because the comic's always written like a bad animated movie. Amy reveals that this was the same airship she was in during the Metal Fires, and that's why she knows where the machine shop is. And I was never told how many airships there were in the general area, so for all I know there's barely any of them, so I'm not going to knock off points for being coincidence, because if there's barely any of them, then this would be likely. And the announcer is supposed to stick to his radio station keeps boring me like the rest of the padding. Sonic presses a button to release gas to escape from Jet. He can ask his friends to have an informal race anytime he wants, so he doesn't even have to do this. Again, why would a hero say he's tormented them? I knew he was an anti-hero right from the first issue, but the problem is that unlike other continuities, this comic wants you to think he's the most purest of pure good people because he won't even get people arrested anymore because Mr. Tinker made him go crazy. Then how is the writer oblivious to how confusingly contradictory Sonic is? Eventually, Lanolin's team distracts Sonic into flying into something which breaks. He saves someone out of habit who thanks him in confusion, and as if Surge can recognize Sonic's scent, she gladly attacks him for no apparent reason considering that she and Kit have no stated motive to actually want to win the race and are apparently only still in the race because dropping out after their first round would be suspicious. I assume she wants a glory, and he's here to help, so that's why she's fighting so many should just remind her of herself. What was the point of making it look like Sonic's cover was blown from her hitting him if she didn't see it was Sonic somehow? Kit warns Surge that if she goes after him she'll lose the race when they were hired to stay in the sweepstakes. Why does he say Mr. Clutch when Clutch is his first name? He's ripping off Cream, which only reminds me of why he doesn't work as a villain. He never feels like it, and the artist keeps forcing it by making him creepy glare for no reason. I've seen most of the fan art of these characters. Practically none of it has them fighting Sonic. It'll have them fighting his friends occasionally. But I think the fact that they usually don't fight the heroes is proof that the fans don't need them to. Predictably, Jet's team wins, because they're game characters. And I don't blame the writer for wanting to avoid the creator's pet comparisons by having IDWOCs win. But the audience cheers for Surge and Kit, with the announcer calling them heroes for scaring off the Phantom Rider. Confusingly, Surge appreciates being called that, and it feels out of character on the surface, but can make sense if she convinces herself that she isn't a villain for wanting to kill Sonic because he's a fraud compared to the hero he should be, and she could do his job better, because she's not opposed to killing Eggman. I have to assume she just likes glory, which has precedent because she wanted acknowledgement before, and even Scourge had a moment like that. In a well-written comic, this moment would happen because it matters, because the writers have a long-term plan for it. People used to professionally written stuff would assume this is supposed to lead into her trying to be a hero more often, rather than forgetting this for no reason. And I can't help that myself, and there is nothing stopping them from wrecking Eggman's stuff. Since the Surge literally couldn't do anything that didn't involve going after Sonic or self-preservation, it had been impossible for her to waste all that time in her broken base instead of fighting Sonic. What keeps me skeptical is that I read a comment that Flynn said they'd always be villains anyways, even though they're innocent people only brainwashed to be jerks, so he needs to reevaluate his definition of evil people who deserve to suffer. So I think only a different writer would constantly take advantage of this, while Flynn's only interested in making them waste time bothering Sonic with no real stakes, and then punishing them for it as if they deserve it. Then the story blatantly wastes my time with Mimic fooling Jewel. Why would anybody care about this? He says nobody has seen Teen Sonic and he can't call Amy. And after he leaves, out of nowhere Jewel looks angry all of a sudden, when she was a gullible moron before. This better mean she figured him out from how obvious it is that it would be easy to contact the heroes, and he'd only not be able to get them to pick up the phone if they were dead. Then it'd make more sense for her to worry that they're dead, if she's been blindly trusting this complete stranger for so long. Plunge cleverly planned to keep Jewel busy with the missing supply drop just in case. This would be a waste of a panel if we were gonna see her complaining about the supply drop anyways. He doesn't believe that disguised Sonic's a liability yet. After all, he was literally nothing but a distraction for the security so that his friends didn't have to hurt them. It's like Side M where he distracted the robots. He's just a distraction instead of the main character of the series getting to do the most important thing. What's the point of showing them talk to each other? I don't care. It just makes me not look forward to the next issue even more, because if he does unmask Sonic, then people won't be impressed by Surge anymore and she'll throw a tantrum instead of trying to actually earn their respect. It's pointlessly sadistic to even have that moment for her if it's just meant to get her hopes up and crush them for the crime of being brainwashed. Tails tells Amy to keep watch while he looks through a dumpster that at first just looked like a filing cabinet. How did she know it was a dumpster? Amy has some relatable dialogue while Tails is sounding smart. But it should know if someone's just hiding something in their trash, he's not even trying. A lot of time for some reason is spent on Amy knowing something's nearby before a hand jumps in her face. And Tails takes it off her. Conveniently, they instantly recognize it as Belle's hand, despite it having no history of being able to move independently. Even though way too many characters in the series wear old-fashioned white gloves like this, that are so out of date that Bugs Bunny couldn't get new ones when he lost his old ones in the Looney Tunes show. It's a reasonable assumption if they already know that she can do this with her hand. But one of them should point out that it isn't guaranteed, because it could just be a robot hand meant for security. That's what I assumed. Anyways, it's shocking how dark this is. It comes out of nowhere that the writers would go this far against her, robot or not. I think they resent her popularity. That Evan didn't intend for her to last this long and hates having to keep her alive just to appease her fans. Writers, don't treat her like the chew toy of the comic to the point where it's on her character trope page if you don't want people speculating like this. But yeah, somehow they already know that Belle's hand can rip off Thing from the Addams Family. So I have to assume she told him she could do that off screen. It's like she got new powers as the plot demands. And while that is a bad writing trope, it's forgivable with a robot that we never got told every ability of before. Even though Eggman had no reason to think making her hand capable of doing this wouldn't be a waste of time, because he lived in a safe village with no hint of anyone who'd trap her. We could assume Tails made her able to do this. Amy somehow thinks the robot could be suffocating in a locker. First Ixis, now her. Also, why does she think people suffocate in lockers when a kid being shoved in a locker is a very common cliche? Tails runs onto the locker with a screwdriver, and the story conveniently doesn't show us how in the world he managed to open it, as if the artist either was too lazy to look up how, or knew it was impossible. The story ends with them seeing Belle was unnecessarily tied up, considering that she was already trapped in a locker with no way to get herself out. So I guess the person who dealt with her was unnecessarily sadistic, and assumed she had super strength because she's a robot. Naturally. Why was Belle even here? She can't fly! She had no reason to leave Tails' workshop in the first place. Why would the airship have landed next to the workshop so she could even go there? This boring, frustrating story was by Josh Trujillo, however you pronounce it, and was only tolerable if you have no respect for the intelligence of the Sonic characters, and don't notice slow pacing, or like it because you don't care if your time is being wasted from nothing interesting or plot relevant happening. It has all the ingredients for a boring story, not only being slow paced with barely anything happening in it, and most of the dialogue is just uninteresting exposition, but it's not even creative. Even if you don't know that it's a nerd level obscure game reference, it's still not contributing much because I've already seen Sonic go to a carnival in the Archie adaptation of Knuckles Chaotix, and I already saw the Chaotix at a carnival in the Knuckles comic. But this does use the concept a lot more, because people go on the rides in this one, and there's a contest thrown in. Boring is bad enough because that's more subjective, but it's also annoying because everyone here should have blamed Rough and Tumble instantly every chance they had, instead of being so stupid or naive they're impossible to relate to, when I expect characters that fight robots to be cool. If it was gonna turn out to be rough, then what was the point of writing a mystery? It's only a surprise in how disappointingly lazy it is. The writing would have looked smart if it at least lampshaded that Vector was being silly by just assuming they were red herrings. There should have been other people in the contest that we never saw before so that a new villain could be the bad guy, and Rough and Tumble would be red herrings. While I want a lot more Sonic stories that are mysteries, the writer was too lazy to make a new character and too afraid to take a risk. And its only major redeeming aspect story-wise was that what happened with Silver's flower was complicated because Charmy and Silver were also involved, which is more effort. If only the issue had 2 stories, this would have had to be padded out with boredom. This issue by Evan Stanley was mostly very boring, with the Sonic stuff being blatant padding with almost nothing interesting going on because it's just the characters racing ahead on airboards. There's no way to make this an interesting story. And then Tails conveniently finds Belle in the machine shop for no apparent reason, which I assume is only written to screw over Surge and Kit for being brainwashed. I couldn't take the story seriously even when it wanted me to, and it'd be common sense to assume that a rogue racer that security's after wouldn't be counted as the winner anyways. Why did it think I would care about the race?